pleasant thing to reflect that one did one's duty by him.' Ralph smiled, as if he meant anything but smiling, and looked round at the strangers present. 'These are only some pupils of mine,' said Wackford Squeers, pointing to the little boy on the trunk, and the two little boys on the floor, who had been staring at each other without uttering a word, and writhing their bodies into most remarkable contortions, according to the custom of little boys when they first become acquainted. 'This gentleman, sir, is a parent who is kind enough to compliment me upon the course of education adopted at Dotheboys Hall, which is situated, sir, at the delightful village of Dotheboys, near Greta Bridge, in Yorkshire, where youth are boarded, clothed, booked, washed, furnished with pocket money.' 'Yes, we know all about that, sir,' interrupted Ralph testily. 'It's in the advertisement.' 'You are very right, sir. It is in the advertisement,' replied Squeers. 'And in the matter of fact besides,' interrupted Mr. Snawley, 'I feel bound to assure you, sir, and I am proud to have this opportunity of assuring you, that I consider Mr. Squeers a gentleman highly virtuous, exemplary, well conducted, and—' 'I make no doubt of it, sir,' interrupted Ralph, checking the torrent of recommendation. 'No doubt of it at all. Suppose we come to business.' 'With all my heart, sir,' rejoined Squeers. 'Never postpone business is the very first lesson we instil into our commercial pupils. Master Belling, my dear, always remember that. Do you hear?' 'Yes, sir,' repeated Master Belling. 'He recollects what it is, does he?' said Ralph. 'Tell the gentleman,' said Squeers. 'Never,' repeated Master Belling. 'Very good,' said Squeers. 'Go on.' 'Never,' repeated Master Belling again. 'Very good indeed,' said Squeers. 'Yes.' 'Suggested Nicholas, good naturedly. 'Perform business,' said Master Belling. 'Never perform business.' 'Very well, sir,' said Squeers, darting a withering look at the culprit. 'You and I will perform a little business on our private account, by and by.' 'And just now,' said Ralph, 'we had better transact our own, perhaps.' 'If you please,' said Squeers. 'Well,' resumed Ralph, 'it's brief enough, soon broached, and I hope easily concluded. You have advertised for an able assistant, sir.' 'Precisely so,' said Squeers. 'And you really want one?' 'Certainly,' answered Squeers. 'Here he is,' said Ralph. 'My nephew Nicholas, hot from school, with everything he learnt there fermenting in his head, and nothing fermenting in his pocket, is just the man you want.' 'I'm afraid,' said Squeers, perplexed with such an application from a youth of Nicholas's figure, 'I'm afraid the young man won't suit me.' 'Yes, he will,' said Ralph. 'I know better. Don't be cast down, sir. You'll be teaching all the young noblemen in Dotheboys Hall in less than a week's time, unless this gentleman is more obstinate than I take him to be.' 'I fear, sir,' said Nicholas, addressing Mr. Squeers, 'that you object to my youth, and to my not being a Master of Arts.' 'The absence of a college degree is an objection,' replied Squeers, looking as grave as he could, and considerably puzzled, no less by the contrast between the simplicity of the nephew and the worldly manner of the uncle, than by the incomprehensible allusion to the young nobleman under his tuition. 'Look here, sir,' said Ralph, 'I'll put this matter in its true light in 2 seconds.' 'If you'll have the goodness,' rejoined Squeers. 'This is a boy, or a youth, or a lad, or a young man, or a hobbledehoy, or whatever you like to call him, of 18 or 19, or thereabouts,' said Ralph. 'That I see,' observed the schoolmaster. 'So do I,' said Mr. Snawley, thinking it as well to back his new friend occasionally. 'His father is dead. He's wholly ignorant of the world, has no resources whatever, and wants something to do,' said Ralph. 'I recommend him to this splendid establishment of yours, as an opening which will lead him to fortune if he turns it to proper account. Do you see that?' 'Everybody must see that,' replied Squeers, half imitating the sneer with which the old gentleman was regarding his unconscious relative. 'I do, of course,' said Nicholas, eagerly. 'He does, of course, you observe,' said Ralph, in the same dry, hard manner. 'If any caprice of temper should induce him to cast aside this golden opportunity before he has brought it to perfection, I consider myself absolved from extending any assistance to his mother and sister. Look at him. Think of the use he may be to you in half a dozen ways. Now, the question is, whether, for some time to come at all events, he won't serve your purpose better than 20 of the kind of people you would get under ordinary circumstances. Isn't that a question for consideration? Yes, it is, said Squeers, answering a nod of Ralph's head with a nod of his own. Good, rejoined Ralph. Let me have 2 words with you. The 2 words were had apart. In a couple of minutes, Mr. Wackford Squeers announced that Mr. Nicholas Nickleby was, from that moment, thoroughly nominated to, and installed in, the office of first assistant master at Dotheboys Hall. Your uncle's recommendation has done it, Mr. Nickleby, said Wackford Squeers. Nicholas, overjoyed at his success, shook his uncle's hand warmly, and could almost have worshipped Squeers on the spot. He's an odd-looking man, thought Nicholas. What of that? Porson was an odd-looking man, and so was Dr. Johnson. All these bookworms are. At 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Mr. Nickleby, said Squeers, the coach starts. You must be here at 1:15, as we take these boys with us. Certainly, sir, said Nicholas. And your fare down I have paid, growled Ralph. So you'll have nothing to do but keep yourself warm. Here was another instance of his uncle's generosity. Nicholas felt his unexpected kindness so much that he could scarcely find words to thank him. Indeed, he had not found half enough when they took leave of the schoolmaster and emerged from the Saracen's Head gateway. I shall be here in the morning to see you fairly off, said Ralph. No skulking. Thank you, sir, replied Nicholas. I never shall forget this kindness. Take care you don't, replied his uncle. You had better go home now and pack up what you've got to pack. Do you think you could find your way to Golden Square first? Certainly, said Nicholas. I can easily inquire. Leave these papers with my clerk, then, said Ralph, producing a small parcel, and tell him to wait till I come home. Nicholas cheerfully undertook the errand, and bidding his worthy uncle an affectionate farewell, which that warm-hearted old gentleman acknowledged by a growl, hastened away to execute his commission. He found Golden Square in due course. Mr. Noggs, who had stepped out for a minute or so to the public house, was opening the door with a latch-key as he reached the steps. What's that? inquired Noggs, pointing to the parcel. Papers from my uncle, replied Nicholas, and you're to have the goodness to wait until he comes home, if you please. Uncle? cried Noggs. Mr. Nickleby, said Nicholas in explanation. Come in, said Newman. Without another word he led Nicholas into the passage, and thence into the official pantry at the end of it, where he thrust him into a chair, and mounting upon his high stool, sat with his arms hanging straight down by his sides, gazing fixedly upon him as from a tower of observation. There is no answer, said Nicholas, laying the parcel on a table beside him. Newman said nothing, but folding his arms and thrusting his head forward so as to obtain a nearer view of Nicholas's face, scanned his features closely. No answer, said Nicholas, speaking very loud, under the impression that Newman Noggs was deaf. Newman placed his hands upon his knees, and without uttering a syllable, continued the same close scrutiny of his companion's face. This was such a very singular proceeding on the part of an utter stranger, and his appearance was so extremely peculiar, that Nicholas, who had a sufficiently keen sense of the ridiculous, could not refrain from breaking into a smile as he inquired whether Mr. Noggs had any commands for him. Noggs shook his head and sighed, upon which Nicholas rose, and remarking that he required no rest, bade him good morning. It was a great exertion for Newman Noggs, and nobody knows to this day how he ever came to make it, the other party being wholly unknown to him. But he drew a long breath, and actually said, out loud, without once stopping, that if the young gentleman did not object to tell, he should like to know what his uncle was going to do for him. Nicholas had not the least objection in the world, but on the contrary was rather pleased to have an opportunity of talking on the subject which occupied his thoughts. So he sat down again, and, his sanguine imagination warming as he spoke, entered into a fervent and glowing description of all the honours and advantages to be derived from his appointment at that seat of learning, Dotheboys Hall. But what's the matter? Are you ill? said Nicholas, suddenly breaking off, as his companion, after throwing himself into a variety of uncouth attitudes, thrust his hands under the stool and cracked his finger joints as if he were snapping all the bones in his hands. Newman Noggs made no reply, but went on shrugging his shoulders and cracking his finger joints, smiling